Hello, Malcolm. How are you today? And how's everything in Florida?
Everything is wonderful in Florida. Sea turtle season has started. We are starting to see the early sea turtles roll up on our beaches to lay their eggs. Everything's great. Life is wonderful. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're quite welcome, and we're thrilled to have you. MDM is such a big topic, and I am just thrilled that we have an MDM expert presenting today. So many organizations are wrestling with reference data. How do I organize data? How do I manage all the common data? What do I do? And it's going to take 17 years and I can't afford that amount of time. So your topic this afternoon, today is very germane. While you're in Florida, please send some warmer weather up here to the Philadelphia area.
No problem.
It's only 41 degrees here today.
I spent my first
So
I spent my first 25 years in Western Canada. I've paid my dues. I know all about the cold weather. Philly, by comparison to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, is like the tropics. So,
yes,
but I hear you. I hear you. 41 degrees. Yeah, it's the time of year where it's like, all right, get on with it already. Be cold or be warm, but just figure it out.
That's what I feel like.
Yeah.
I usually don't complain about the weather. It's always interesting, but it's spring and I'd like it to feel more like spring. But of course, in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, spring is a relative term.
That's it. Yes. Yes. Well stated.
Somebody has just sent you a message.
Let me open the Q&A. Oh, Garanga. Hello, my friend. It's been a while. I hope you've been well. Nice to see you.
And we're going to take one more minute of light chatting, and then we'll get started with a short intro, and I'll turn it over to Malcolm. So what is your biggest challenge right now in getting people to understand the value of a data strategy, especially for MDM?
Well, our biggest challenge for MDM is the same as it is for data governance, the same as it is for data quality, the same as it is for data strategy. It's how do we once and forever and finally get over this hump of how do I value investments in data management? How can I quantify the business outcomes that I am driving through better master data management, through better reference data management, through better data quality? How can I show that $1 invested in those things will actually yield more than $1 from a business outcome perspective? Increase profits, increase cost savings, or reduce risk, or some combination of the three. That is the penultimate challenge of all data management professionals. We see it day in and day out in the MDM space. We'll talk about that a little bit more today, but that's always been a huge challenge and continues to be.
Great. It's a challenge that every single organization, no matter what size, is facing. Even small startups have to figure out how to manage their data effectively, rather than have 17 separate applications capturing the 23 pieces of data they really need. Let's make sure that things are aligned, they're organized, they're done by policy, and that there's the right architecture. But it doesn't need to take 17 years to do this.
It does not.
And that's why today's topic is so germane, because in about 3 months, you can have an effective MDM initiative moving along, following these steps. Without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started, if that's okay with you, Malcolm.
Let's go.
Great. Thank you so much. For all of you who are joining us and are not sure where you are, you're at datamanagementu.com's webinar series. I am Anne-Marie Smith, the executive editor of datamanagementu.com. And today I am thrilled to have as my guest presenter, Malcolm Hawker. Malcolm writes extensively on many topics in data management. He's the head of data strategy for Prophecy. And one of those topics that he expounds on is the value of master data management. He's an author for DMU, and I'm thrilled to have him as a presenter today. Before we get started with Malcolm, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping points. If you have a question, Please pose the question in Q&A and we'll get to it to the extent we can. If we don't get to your question, we will capture them and they will be featured on the Data Management U webpage in LinkedIn. So if you are a LinkedIn user, follow Data Management U. You'll see your question there. We'll get answers to it. You can comment on it and interact with all of our presenters. If you're interested in data management education, we have a website with online on-demand courses. The website is called datamanagementeducation.com. We're streaming live on YouTube, and the sessions are recorded so that they're posted to the EW Solutions YouTube channel. Watch, especially at night when you're trying to think of something entertaining. We have a lot of content out there we'll be thrilled to share with you. Malcolm's slides are available at the website, datamanagementu.com/webinars. If you attend the entire 1 hour session, in about a week to 10 days, you'll receive a certificate granting you 1 professional development unit. You have to attend the whole session. Zoom does record when you come in, when you leave. If you stay for the entire time, you earn 1 PDU. Thank you to our sponsors and partner organizations. We're always looking for new sponsors and new partners to help spread the word about enterprise data management, its business value, its technical capabilities, and to help foster the data management community. Why are we here today? Well, in the next 50 minutes or so, Malcolm Hawker will present how to build an MDM program in about 90 days. What are we going to learn today? Our learning points are about the MDM program and the need for agility, the importance of choosing the right MDM style, how to gain executive alignment and sponsorship for a big initiative like MDM is, staffing and resourcing an MDM program to do it at speed rather than taking, as I said earlier, 17 years to make this happen. And Malcolm will offer some practical lessons from what he calls the MDM School of Hard Knocks. For those of you who do not know Malcolm, I'd like to spend 1 minute introducing him. He'll do a much better job of presenting himself than I can ever do. But as an ex-Gartner analyst, he has consulted to some of the largest businesses in the world on their enterprise information management strategies. He's a frequent public speaker, as I noted, and he posts frequently on LinkedIn and is an author for datamanagementu.com. Without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Malcolm so that we can all learn from him. Take it away, Malcolm.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It's my pleasure to be here. Let me share my screen. And can you just confirm that you're actually seeing it?
Yes, I can confirm that I see it.
Wonderful. This is good news. Okay, guys,
Yes.
we've got a lot of ground to cover. My name is Malcolm Hawker. I'm the head of Prophecy. We make MDM software. If MDM is in your plans, we hope that after this presentation today, you will consider us. That's where the selling stops. As Anne-Marie mentioned, I'm a former Gartner analyst. A lot of what you're about to learn today comes through the 1,500 plus, yes, you heard that correctly, 1,500 plus interactions that I had with CDOs, CIOs, chief procurement officers, chief financial officers, you name it, every day working for Gartner, answering questions about how do we accelerate our MDM efforts? How do we drive value from MDM? How do we get off the ground? That was easily the #1 conversation that I had while I was an analyst. Prior to that, I actually ran an IT organization for a $2 billion publicly traded company. I was responsible for MDM and data governance. And that's the school of hard knocks. So I've learned what to do in many ways the hard way, what to avoid, because my first 2 or 3 times at MDM was actually, they were kind of failures. I'm going to be honest and say it. So I'm here to share today what I know. We're going to be moving really quickly through a lot of this content. So Emery, please keep me honest if something goes awry with the presentation. Be great.
I will.
But
The only thing I would
awesome.
suggest is that you do slideshow to make it easier for
Is
our
it not doing
viewers
that?
to watch.
Hold on. I thought I was, but
No,
let's try it again. Are we there now?
no.
We're not there. Hold on.
You
Why
want
am
to
I not?
enable editing?
Oops, sorry. Wrong one. Wrong one. Okay. Are you seeing a guy with this? Are you seeing the title screen again?
Now I am, yes.
Okay.
Still, it's not slideshow view.
When I go to slideshow view, it goes into a different view. So when I hit slideshow view, how about I just do that? Is that now most of the
Better,
screen?
thank you. Okay,
Most of the screen?
most of the screen, it's big enough.
Yeah, when I go into slideshow view, something weird happens.
Oh, well, it doesn't matter. We're fine.
Okay, all right, you got it. Okay,
Yes,
we're going
sir.
to move quickly through a lot of this content. Thank you for helping make sure everybody can make sense of it. What I saw as a Gartner analyst is that in the last 3 to 4 years, I've seen a real sea change in the focus around MDM. And I wrote about this extensively when I was at Gartner. What we've seen, in many ways, a result of the pandemic, in many ways, a result of supply chain disruptions, as a result of so many companies focusing on digital transformation and digital acceleration, having a solid data foundation, which includes MDM, has gone from this nice to have. We'll get to that eventually. It'll be phase 2 or phase 3 of our data management initiative or of our ERP consolidation or whatever. We've gone from that to MDM being a must-have. When I was at Gartner in 2020, when the pandemic hit, I thought for sure, boy, I'm going to need to look for a job. Nobody's going to be wanting to talk about reference data or master data because everybody else is going to be focusing on higher priorities during the pandemic. And I was completely wrong. What I saw was people running towards MDM because data leaders rightfully acknowledge that I need to have this foundation. If things change in the business world, I want to hit the accelerator, and when I hit it, the business needs to respond. And if their data house is awry, we're not going to be able to respond that quickly. However, as important as MDM programs have always been, and have certainly become, they still remain relatively high risk and still sadly prone to failure. We'll talk about a lot of the reasons why today, but really what I'm here to share is a message on how to get off the ground quickly, how to launch an MDM program quickly. What I will share are tried and true ways of making sure that you can get some value in the next 90 days. Emery mentioned I live in Florida. I live on the Space Coast, and I actually took that photo. Isn't that cool?
Oh, beautiful. Yes, it
Yeah.
is cool. It's
That's
beautiful.
a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket taking off. So that's just down the road from me here. So it's kind of cool. Anyway, we're going to talk about 4 key things today, guys. One, we'll talk about a maniacal focus. And yes, I use that term correctly. A maniacal focus on managing your scope and being focused on the right type of MDM approach, the implementation style, how critical that is. Number 2, finding the right business partner. That's that engagement, and that's that executive sponsorship and stakeholder engagement. 3, being agile and being iterative. This is so important. We can no longer kind of follow the old school waterfall, throwing the requirements, over the fence. It just doesn't work in a world of digital transformation, and avoiding some of those big MDM pitfalls that we're talking about. Another photo that I took. These are 2, sadly, no longer with me, 2 of my favorite animals in the world. That's Alex and Penny, and they were both ball crazy. And that needs to be you. The ball is your scope for your MDM initiative, and you need to be Alex and Penny. You need to be razor focused and maniacally focused on managing for that scope. What you need to be focused on is what we call an analytical style of MDM, right? What you were really trying to solve for here in this 90-day focus of MDM is solving for a 360 of something. And honestly, it's probably not even a 360 of something. It's going to be a 280 of something, or maybe even a 180 of something, where you are still able to show incredible value for that 360 or 280 or 180, or that single view of a customer, of a supplier, or what we'll talk about here is more of a single view of a process, right? Having some insights deeply into a process. So If you want to launch an MDM program in 90 days, if you want to be showing value in 90 days, you really, really need to focus on this more analytical style of MDM. What that will allow you to do is take data from multiple places, put it into one place, and be able to ask the question or answer the question of confidence of how many suppliers do we truly have? How many customers do we really have? How many products do we really have? What's the depth of our relationship with customer A look like? How much business are we doing across this customer hierarchy? Those are the types of questions you're going to need to be answering here. This does start to get into your executive stakeholders and your executive sponsorship and the type of use cases you should be focused on. But when you focus on an analytical style of MDM, everything else gets so much easier. Your focus on governance gets a lot easier. So instead of having to focus on everything from a governance perspective, you really just focus on the governance needed to enable that 360 view of something, right? This is so, so important here, guys. I used to see all the time, people would rightfully acknowledge during an MDM initiative that governance was a dependency and governance was something that you needed to focus on. That's absolutely true. But do you need to do all aspects of governance to launch an MDM program in 90 days? No, because if you try, you're not going to launch in 90 days. So take a kind of an MVP approach here, the minimum viable governance that you need in order to support that limited scope initiative. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Operational styles of MDM are the quintessential gold master record of something, right? Where you create a gold master record of customer, a supplier, some other domain, where you pump that data into source systems. Ultimately, that's where most companies want to get to from an MDM perspective. But if you make that your scope for your first iteration of MDM, you will not launch in 90 days. The reason is because, bonk on my microphone, the reason is because the minute you start to syndicate that master record into source systems is the minute you probably have to change business processes in those source systems. You're going to ask your salespeople to kind of onboard customers differently, or your procurement people to manage your supplier data differently. The minute you do that is the minute you change a business process is the minute that things are going to probably slow down, and you're not going to be able to do that in 90 days. That's implementation style. Be focused on an analytical style. You don't need to break every data silo in this initial scope. You don't, right? So keep things limited. Focus on 2 or 3 or 4 sources of data instead of 15 or 20, right? You need to be able to find a way to align your business scope or your scope with a business outcome. So the interim step here is a single view of customer. That's great. What will that actually buy you? Right? Will you be able to consolidate, if a single view of a supplier, what will that buy you? Well, maybe you'll be able to consolidate your supplier agreements. Maybe you'll be able to negotiate some lower prices for your core materials. Focus on a specific business case. Bottoms up approaches here do not work. And what I mean by that is what I saw over and over and over when I was at Gartner is that companies would rightfully acknowledge they needed MDM. And then they would say, okay, I need to go discover all of my data, profile all of my data, lineage all of my data, catalog all of my data, glossary all of my data. And 8 months would go by and they'd have nothing to show for it. They'd be halfway through a business glossary. They'd be halfway through a data catalog. And those things are great, guys. Don't get me wrong. You need glossaries and catalogs and inventories of data. But if you do that first, if you start at the bottom, if you start at trying to identify and discover all your data, it's going to take a long time to do that. So what we recommend is instead start with a problem. The problem would be, hey, I want to cross-sell some more. I want to have consolidated payment terms with my suppliers. I want to be able to identify white space opportunities across my sales channels. Those are business problems that can be solved with analytical styles of MDM. Those are business problems that can be solved with that 360 view that I was talking about. Notice, I'm actually saying don't take a domain-centric approach here. I know this is kind of heretical, and every time I asked when I was a Gartner analyst, hey, what's your scope going to be for this MDM initiative? Oh, it's customer domain, product domain. Your business leaders are not incented on domains. And I will say something here that is going to sound horrible, but the business doesn't care about domains. The business cares about those business processes, cross-selling, upselling, lowering your supplier costs, lowering your inventory carrying costs, optimizing your relationships with suppliers. Those are the things that you need to be focused on. Those are the outcomes you should be focused on instead of focusing on a domain, because focusing on a domain will immediately mean your scope's going to be bigger, probably, and you're going to have a really, really hard time of quantifying the value of what you're doing. Building a business case, this is so important. And I would argue it's just not optional. And what do I mean by a business case? Well, they are quantification of business outcomes that can be associated to that 360-degree view of something. Things on the left-hand side of this table: improve cross sales, reduce inventory costs, optimize supplier agreements, lower risk, increased sales. When I asked my clients at Gartner often, well, how are you going to know you succeeded? What they would say is the things on the right-hand side of this table. Well, we'll have better data. We'll eliminate duplicate records. We'll get rid of our null fields. Again, the business really doesn't care about that stuff on the right-hand side of this table. They care about the stuff on the left-hand side. And building a business case around MDM is so important. Also important, again, talking about scope, be focused on 1 or 2 business KPIs, not 10, not 15, not 20, 1 or 2. And these are just examples here, guys, on the left-hand side of this table. The list here for you could be hundreds of KPIs long, but figuring out what those KPIs is a function of having what those KPIs are and where you should be focused is a function of engaging your stakeholders. We're going to talk about that. So stakeholders are so important here. And there's some practical advice that I'm going to be talking about. Yes, you need to have business people aligned. Yes, you need to have executives aligned, and it's really alignment to those KPIs. But what's kind of a more pragmatic approach here? One thing to remember, and this again seems kind of counterintuitive and maybe a little heretical because it's generally not something you hear. Generally, what you will hear is start at the top, get the CEO to align, get some funding, and then work your way down. I would argue that where you should be focused from an alignment perspective first is functional leadership. VPs of procurement, VPs of sales, VPs of finance, or maybe senior directors in your organization, depending how big your company is. But start with conversations with those folks. And start with the assumption that you're going to deliver a 360-degree view of something. Have conversations with your VP of procurement that says, hey, listen, what do you think you could do? How could you improve your business if you had a single view of your suppliers? What are some of the KPIs that you're measured by? What's the difference between hitting your bonus this year and not hitting your bonus? These are the types of conversations you should be having with these functional leaders to get their alignment. Yes, Emery.
May I ask a question?
Of course you can, yes. Your show.
Thank you. Let's say that we have a client who has 3 functional leaders, all of whom are interested in answering an analytical set of KPI business questions.
Yep.
Is there any benefit to trying to tackle 2 or even all 3 of them at once? Or would you recommend focusing on 1?
The latter.
Yeah.
I would really be focusing on the latter unless they were all part of the same value chain where they were all tied to similar KPIs.
And we have a question about domains.
Sure.
Is there a risk in not focusing on domains of not being able to take into consideration the business issues for the cross domain business processes?
Well, that is the core argument for not focusing on a domain, right?
Okay.
So the core argument for not focusing on a domain is that if you're going to look at it from a business process perspective, right? And often those business processes will be cross-functional. Quote to cash is a great example, right? Where you go all the way from a quote in a CRM system to recognizing some money in an ERP system. That's actually a relatively long business process, so maybe that one from a scope perspective may be too big, but even the process is simply going from a proposal in a sales system to a contract in an ERP system. That's a great example, right, of a process-based scope where you're limiting your scope based on a business process, which is maybe you have a situation where you don't have a single view of all of your contracts for a given customer within your CRM system. I used to hear this all the time, where the sales world is completely segmented off away from the ERP world, where you have rev rec happening here and you've got sales happening here, and it's really difficult to tie them together, right? The contrary argument here is always, well, if I focus on a business process, that means I'm going to have to focus on multiple domains. In the case that I gave, it's the contract domain or some sort of sales proposal or agreement domain and a customer domain. And that's true. That is true. There could be multiple domains involved in that one business process, but you can quantify a business outcome from that. You can work with VPs of sales who are paid, literally paid based on recognized revenue. Where you can have a conversation with a chief revenue officer who will tell you and say, hey, listen, I don't know when revenue gets backed out of our ERP system when companies don't pay, right? Or our sales incentive systems are completely, it takes forever to manage them and they're not automated, and our sales payment checks are off because of discrepancies between our CRM and our ERP. So those are a couple of examples of taking a more of a process-driven approach here instead of a domain-driven approach. When you look at domains, it's inevitable that you will have to go across multiple use cases, across multiple sources. And then even if you succeed at mastering a domain, how do you measure the success of that? So that's the answer. Avoid a domain-centric approach. It is a false limitation on scope because most of the cross-functional domains touch almost every system anyway. By definition, it's MDM. So I would focus and recommend strongly that you focus on some business process that you can align KPIs to and measure those KPIs.
Okay.
Getting to the second bullet on this slide here. So when you're talking to those executives, find executives that have specific business pains that can be solved with analytical styles of MDM. A great place to start here, guys, is in sales and marketing. I've yet to meet a sales leader who will not complain about data in some way, shape, or form. They're going to do it, and they'll give you specifics. They'll say examples like I just gave, right? I have no idea what's going on in my ERP system. My salespeople keep creating new records in our CRM, and we've got multiple versions of Acme Incorporated, and we've got opportunities spanning multiple iterations of Acme Incorporated within our CRM. And I can't do any sales forecasting because of it, right? These are classic examples of pains that could be solved with an analytical style of MDM. Sit down with those stakeholders, get their alignment, start to map out what you think those business benefits could be and what the actual bottom line impacts could be. Ask, hey, if our sales forecast improved by 5%, what would that mean from the bottom line of the company's perspective? I guarantee you they'd have an answer. Maybe it's about sales qualified leads and just generating better leads and qualification of opportunities. What would it mean if you were able to drive 5% new sales qualified leads by identification of white space through better hierarchy management that you can't do today? I guarantee you that sales organization that you work with internally will have a metric that says, if you give me 10 sales qualified leads, I will tell you exactly how much money that will put in the bank, because every sales organization has that metric. Don't try to force engagement. Don't try to force this, right? What I would see all the time when I was at Gartner is that you would have stated business priorities, and those things are really, really important. Don't get me wrong. But often the IT leaders would kind of assume, well, this is important, this is important, this is important, because that's what's stated on our all hands, and it's in some of our financial statements. That means I'm going to have to go work with this functional leader, and I'm going to have to get them to align, right? Don't try to force alignment. Find people who want to work with you and who have problems to solve, because having a business partner that is putting wind in your sails instead of putting obstacles in your way is going to be so important to this quick launch.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, incentives. This is an interesting one. I saw this more times than I thought I would when I was a Gartner analyst, which was where somebody at a senior level would say, hey, let's do MDM. Here's some money to go do MDM and go solve the problem. And then you go talk to those functional leaders, and the functional leader would say, nah, don't want it. Don't want it. And just because you get budget to solve the problem, it doesn't mean that those functional leaders are going to align to using MDM to solve problems. So this is my way of saying that just because you have a CFO or a CEO excited about MDM doesn't mean your VP of sales or procurement or supply chain or materials management is equally excited or will align to doing what you need to do in order to get off the ground. Don't assume that your incentives align, because often simply they do not. I learned this the hard way, where I had a CEO say, go figure out this problem, go launch an MDM. And I did. And it was a massive failure because it ended up breaking some processes in our sales organization. I didn't get the salesperson alignment because I assumed that they were aligned because the CEO told me to solve the problem, and everything went sideways very quickly. So work with those functional leaders, get their alignment. Don't assume that just because the CFO says that something is important, that a VP in that same organization is going to assume that it is as well.
I've seen that as well as a consultant, Malcolm, where the senior level at the client says, we're going to do this. And then you get to the functional implementation levels, and people are really focused on other things, or they're just not focused on what you think you're supposed to be doing because your senior level client told you that was the case. It seems to be much more common than we would expect.
Well, right. And this also touches on the importance of that business case that I was talking about. I would so often get into conversations with data leaders who were embarking on MDM or data quality or data integration, data governance, and they would say, "Yep, our CEO is fully aligned, excited. Our CFO fully aligned, excited. We've got the money. CIO fully aligned, C-level. Yes, we're good." And I would say, "Hey, do you have a business case?" Well, we've got the alignment. We've got the money. We've got the budget. We've got the executives to align. And I would still tell my clients, you still need that business case.
Yes.
What happens when you change your management, when you get a new CEO or a new CIO? What happens when you go acquire a new company? What happens when we go to war in Europe that nobody could have ever anticipated, and all of a sudden the entire world is upside down? And you're in a budget meeting having to justify why so much money is going out the door on this MDM thing, right? The business case is literally your shield to make sure that you are able to continue to move forward on this. It's your way of telling the organization how much value you're providing. It's your way to make sure that you can keep the resources that were previously allocated to you. And if you don't have it in the future, it's just going to be so much harder to justify everything that you're doing.
Yes, EW Solutions strongly agrees with that completely.
Yay, we're aligned. There's harmony.
Yes, we are.
All right. So what does it mean to be agile? What does it mean to have kind of an MVP and agile approach to MDM and governance? And I would argue even data strategy. Now, let's keep in mind here, folks, what we're talking about is launching an MDM program in 90 days. Data strategy is important. Data governance is important. Having some form of an MDM strategy is also important. But does that mean for all three of those things, an MDM strategy, a governance strategy, and overall data strategy, that you need to have the Mona Lisa of strategy documents for all three? No, you do not. I see this all the time where companies acknowledge, well, I need to do a data strategy. That means I'm going to be heads down and I'm going to work on my data strategy for the next 2 years. I would argue this is one of the reasons why chief data officer tenures are so low, is because they rightfully acknowledge the importance of strategy. Obviously, it's important, but they put that as a hard dependency before being able to deliver any sort of value from a governance perspective or a quality perspective, or in this case, an MDM perspective. So what we're looking at here is my version of an overall kind of data management operating model, an MDM operating model. It's the wheel on the inside and the middle, and the outside kind of spinning wheel is the kind of the strategic framework that I see a lot of organizations use. And what I would argue here is that be pragmatic from a strategy perspective, right? The things in the outer ring of this wheel, you will not change overnight, right? You are not going to change in the next 90 days. You're not going to change your corporate culture. You're not going to change your data and analytics governance maturity in the next 90 days. The best thing that you can do in 90 days is to understand what's important to the organization and build a roadmap around that, and to deliver to that within the confines and within the constraints of your existing data culture, of your existing data and analytics governance maturity, and yes, even your existing levels of data literacy. I see so many companies say, okay, well, we've got a literacy challenge here. People don't know the value of data. They don't know what a schema is or what a table is, and we need to go teach that before we can get any value out of data. No, those things are important. Don't get me wrong. Training is important. Our friends at Data Management, you can help with that. But are you going to address all of these large-scale training issues, these cultural issues, some of these other constraints in 90 days? No. So instead of trying to say, I need to fix them, just manage them as constraints. We're IT people. We know how to work and operate in world of constraints. We have time, we have people, we have money. These are the usual constraints. Just add in your governance maturity, add in your overall kind of corporate culture, your data-driven culture, whether you have or you don't have one, and focus on, starting on the top right, what are some of those key outcomes going to be? What's the high-level business strategy that we're trying to align to here? So be pragmatic when it comes to driving a data strategy. Dive into the middle of this ring as well. We're going to talk about that over the next 15 minutes or so. And what will it take to operationalize things like technology and some sort of roadmap and some sort of governance model. But don't get too hung up on trying to be perfect when it comes to defining a data strategy, because that's not going to happen in 90 days. What would a minimum viable MDM strategy look like? Well, it gets back to those things that we were talking about before, with having one or two key business priorities, key performance indicators, KPIs, the things that you're focused on. Build a strategy around that, right? Model how your MDM is going to improve those KPIs. Put together that high-level business case that Anne-Marie was just talking about, right? Understand what success looks like. What you want to do here is imagine yourself, maybe you're at a company all hands, and for whatever reason, you are stuck in an elevator for 30 seconds with your CEO or your CIO or your CFO. And she or he asks you, "Hey, Malcolm, it's nice to see you. What are you working on?" Could you, in 30 seconds, while that elevator goes from the first floor to the 7th floor or whatever floor it is, could you say something to the effect of, "Well, I'm so glad you asked. We are working to drive a 5% reduction in our overall total inventory management costs by having a single view of our materials." Ah, fantastic. Boom. That's it. Business value and how you're going to do it. That's what I would argue is a kind of more of an MVP approach to MDM strategy. Don't get into data quality. Don't get into data cleansing. Can you have an elevator pitch? This is what a product person would call an elevator pitch. Can you do that? And can you do it in under 30 seconds in a couple sentences? I think you can, but that's really what we're going for here from a strategy perspective. Take a product management approach. I just mentioned the elevator pitch, right? This is something we're seeing more and more of in the data world. I think it's exciting, but I don't think being a data owner, is the same thing as being a product manager. I think these are two very, very different things. Instead of focusing on being a data owner, which is kind of nebulous and automatically says I own something and you don't, and it's all mine. Instead, take kind of a more of a custodian or a product management type approach. And that I'm excited about. The implementation of product management into data management, I think we can all learn a lot from product managers, right? And product managers kind of immediately know and intuitively know that they're custodying something, right? That they are helping move a product along and helping develop a product, where the core of what they do is understanding business needs and understanding them intimately, getting back to those KPIs that we're talking about. Product managers are really good at building customer relationships. One would argue that is their core function, right? Product managers are really good at managing expectations, right? As a part of those ongoing stakeholder conversations that you're having, managing what you're going to get and what you're not going to get, right? Product managers would automatically assume that maybe our biggest problem here isn't data literacy. Yes, we can do a better job at training. Yes, we can do a better job at what a product manager would call go-to-market, right? And educating and training and supporting our end users. Those things are critical, but don't assume that data literacy is your biggest problem. It probably isn't, and I would argue it's a little toxic as well. Separate conversation.
Why do you think it's toxic? 30 seconds, not even 30 seconds on that.
The opposite of literate is illiterate. And who wants to start a conversation with somebody that you're trying to help by telling them they're illiterate?
Good point. Okay. Yes.
I mean, it's that simple. And maybe I'm a little bit too linear in my thinking and literate, or but I think the phrase is loaded. I prefer some form of data fluency. But honestly, if you had a product manager, launching your data product and managing a data product, they would just call it end user training. Or they would call it a go-to-market process. They wouldn't call it, data literacy. Building a roadmap. This is going to be part of your strategy. Build a roadmap that provides MDM value slowly and surely over time. Phase 1, 90 days, 1 or 2 business KPIs, very limited scope. Take a business process-centric approach, not a domain-centric approach. Deliver some value and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. I just got ahead of myself. But this is, it's kind of like this is the rolling rock here of how to be iterative when it comes to MDM, right? You want to deliver that limited scope, deliver on value, be limited on those 1 or 2 business KPIs, promote your success, ring your bell. Hey, look what we've done, right? Hang something up at the water cooler that says how great MDM is and where we went to and what we had and what we have now, right? Hang up some metrics and some dashboards that actually show those business process improvements. the increased cross-sell, the reduced cost, the reduced business risk, whatever those things are. After you've done that, go get some more funding, go get some more engagement, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. In time, from an MDM perspective, from a governance perspective, and from a data strategy perspective, you will get to a point of being closer to 100%, right? So again, instead of figuring out everything from an MDM perspective, figure out a little bit. Instead of figuring out everything from a governance perspective, figure out a little bit. Same with the data strategy. And as you do this more and more and more, into the future, you'll get to the point where you have 80% of a data strategy, 80% of a governance framework and governance model and governance policies and procedures, 80% of what you want to do from an MDM, and eventually maybe even 100. I've mentioned this numerous times over and over. An MVP, a minimum viable product approach to data governance, right? Yes, data governance is important. When we look at, for example, the data management book of knowledge, there's 10 different things that we need to be focused on from a discipline perspective when it comes to data governance. Each of these 10 pieces of the data governance pie, in and of themselves, could be months and months and months of work to figure out from a policy and procedure perspective. Do we want to try to make that a dependency for MDM? Well, you can, but you're not going to launch an MDM program in 90 days. So what's the minimum governance required to support that analytical style of MDM to solve for the 360-degree view of something in support of a business process? What's the minimum amount you have to do from a governance perspective? You take that approach, you will have a chance of launching in 90 days. The minimum required. And I know, again, from a lot of folks who get hired to implement, particularly CDOs. CDOs, one of their top 3 roles is to implement a governance function in a lot of organizations. And ultimately, yes, it will be enterprise-wide, and it will be all 10 aspects of whatever framework you want to use to define a data governance framework. But we exist to provide value to the business, and I would argue that carving out a small MVP-centric focus of governance is the best way to do this in the short term. What does that team look like from an MDM perspective? Well, a few things to kind of think of here. One is that in the future, well, optimally, I should say, not necessarily in the future, optimally, data governance and MDM is an active, ongoing collaboration with business stakeholders, right? Optimally, the business stakeholders are the ones that are defining the governance policies, the quality rules, all of the things that go into and need to be codified within an MDM environment. So optimally, it is the business stakeholders that are driving those policies. IT people implement them and manage them, but ultimately it's the business people that do it. What I see here is a little bit of chicken and egg, honestly, when we're talking about launching an MDM program. So sometimes IT people will go to the business and say, hey, we're doing MDM. Here's the business benefits. I've talked to your boss. We've modeled out. We build a business case for 2 or 3 KPIs, and we think there's going to be some value here. You know, he or she is aligned, and I'm going to need you to allocate 2 full-time data stewards to doing this. And I'm going to need you to participate in data quality or data governance committee, and that's going to require at the beginning probably 3 or 4 hours a week for the next 6 months. And can you start tomorrow? That's often really, really hard to get those business stakeholders to align those resources, especially if you haven't shown any value yet. So the chicken and egg here is, I'll give you the resources if you can show the value, but you can't show the value until you've allocated the resources.
Right.
So often what I've seen and what I sometimes recommend is for IT to take what I would kind of say temporarily take a disproportionate role here at the beginning. Pardon me. Need some water. Where at the beginning, maybe for this first 90 days, where IT takes a little bit of a disproportionate role in helping define MDM requirements. Now, this is a tightrope walk because you don't want to define requirements. And really, guys, what we're talking about when we say requirements, what we're talking about here mostly are governance policies and procedures. These are the things that are codified into an MDM or into an MDM software system. Chances are you're probably going to use software. We'll talk about that in the next slide. Chances are it's going to be software. But these policies, like how do I define a customer, right? What are the attributes that define a customer? Well, how do I define relationships between customers? These are governance policies. And the tightrope walk here is to make sure that you can get those requirements and define them, right? And get business input on them but where you, from an IT perspective, are really kind of doing most of the lifting. In an optimal world in the future, the business will be doing all of the lifting from a policy definition perspective. But at the beginning, chances are pretty good that you may take kind of a temporary leadership role in defining these policies. So remember, when it comes to MDM and data governance, from a governance perspective, there's really kind of two things that are really important: policy definition and policy implementation and management. MDM is really all about implementation and management, and it's the policies that need to be defined in order for the MDM program to work. And I would argue that at the beginning, it's okay for IT to take a little bit more of a leadership role there. What do the roles look like? Well, what I've seen in the past and what's worked for me is really kind of 4 key roles here when it comes to this 90-day MDM program and beyond. Notice my liberal use of the word program. This is not a project, or as we say in Canada, project. It is not. This is a program that will live beyond 90 days. So the roles here we are talking about are roles that need to live in perpetuity. The good news is that when you show value, the business is more likely to keep funding those roles and to make these permanent roles. Now, given the size of your organization, these may not be FTEs. These could be equivalent FTEs, but they are some sort of program lead. This is the most critical role. This is your MDM spokesperson. This is the eyes and ears and face of an MDM program within your organization. This is the person who goes and has conversations with senior vice presidents 1 minute and has a conversation with a data architect the next. This is often, for a lot of organizations, a bit of a unicorn role here, because you need to be 1/2 IT, 1/2 business, and 1/2 sales. And yes, that is 3 halves, right? That's part of the challenge here. You need to be doing a little bit of selling. You need to be doing some leadership. You need to be technically capable, but business savvy at the same time. This is the most critical role to staff in this initiative. I suspect many of you watching today would probably fall into that role. There will
Malcolm,
be, yes.
we have a question. I don't mean to interrupt, but I think
No, please do.
main right here. One of our attendees, Meryl Alpert, asked, isn't it risky to say that IT is taking the lead
It is.
in this? And maybe the phrase could be business collaboration?
Yes. And Meryl, so glad you could make it. Nice to virtually see you outside of LinkedIn. Yes, it is slightly dangerous. Yes, it is, because ultimately it should be that business IT collaboration. Yes, it should be. And there's a risk to IT when it assumes too much of the requirements in governance policy definition. I learned that the hard way. The first time I implemented MDM, I defined all the business rules because I couldn't get anybody to engage with me. Every time I knocked on their door, they told me to go pound sand. So I tried to figure out the data model. I tried to find out the customer definition. I defined the merge rules for our gold master record, and it was a train wreck. because what I thought were the world's greatest governance policies didn't even align to how the business was being managed and run on a daily basis. So yes, you're absolutely right. I'm just, my caution here, and why I describe this as a kind of a temporary leadership role, my caution here is because I know that optimally you should have that kind of full business engagement. The business should be driving, but I've just seen so many situations where the business is like, I can't do this until you show me, right? And a business case will help. The business case absolutely positively will help. Getting senior level, a functional level alignment will also certainly help. So in a perfect world, you would go to a director of procurement and say, hey, listen, I need a lot of help here in defining some business rules to create a single view of our supplier. And I need you to do it. And by the way, your VP has already allocated your time, because I've shown a business case that is going to drive $1 million for us next year. Perfect. Where do I start? Let's go. But even when you've got all the alignment, when you've got stakeholders involved, even when you've got a business case, I still run into situations where it's like, yeah, I'll get to it when I get to it, or it's not a priority for me, or I can't attend the governance committee meeting this week, or I'm gonna assign somebody else to attend the governance committee meeting for me this week, and then the next week they're not even there anymore, and 3 weeks goes by and there's nobody at the committee meeting anymore. So yes, you're right. It's risky. Totally agree.
And I want to make sure that we're paying attention to time.
We are. Yep. I will breeze through the last few slides, but program lead, technical analyst, this is somebody who's going to be defining a lot of and codifying a lot of these governance policies into the MDM, into things like data modeling and all the kind of the downstream and understanding the upstream and downstream processes, like understanding how the business works, right? It's going to be really, really key, understanding how the business works. So often these business analysts are coming from the business themselves and not from IT. People who know sales, know procurement, on and on. Some systems architect in some form, and architect roles are really, really important because they need to be building for speed and agility, but also making sure that what's being built will scale into the future. Also another tightrope walk that will need to happen here. And obviously some sort of system administrator and maybe even a data steward. And yes, the data stewards should be on the business side, but again, in the short term, maybe they're on the IT side. Not optimal, but I see it happen all the time. Technology. Chances are really good you're going to be using MDM software. Can you do MDM without software? Yes, of course you can. It's just going to be really, really difficult to scale, and it won't be nearly as efficient as it would be otherwise. Can you do MDM on an Excel spreadsheet? Yes, you can. But it's probably not going to work for your business because it's not going to be scalable. It's not going to be configurable. And if you were anywhere north of, I will say, you know, a tens of millions of dollar company, or maybe hundreds of millions of dollars a company, having some sort of manual approach here is probably just not going to work. All right, some keys to a success. Consultants. So I was a consultant. I was the guy with the money signs and the glasses. And the reason why he's smiling is because he's billing you $750 an hour. And he has a vested interest in to make sure that you are billing for as many hours as possible. So that's one of the reasons why I'm having the conversation today is like, okay, you manage your scope, you define your scope. 90% of MDM programs are supported by consultants. They're good, they are helpful, they can be incredibly valuable, but you need to put a fence around them. And that fence is the scope that we are maniacally being focused on. Those 1 or 2 business KPIs, 1 or 2 business processes with a focus on a single business stakeholder, maybe 2 or 3 if it's the same business process. But you manage the consultants don't manage you, right? The best thing that you can do is to have your outcomes defined before you engage consultants, before you start getting into long, prolonged SOWs. The consultant's dream here is where they go in, where there is no goal, there are no goals defined, there's no understanding of what success looks like, and it is the classic phase 1, phase 2. Okay, we'll go in and we'll profile all your data, figure out all your data, find all your data, lineage all of your processes. You will have swim lane diagrams over every wall of your office, and 7 or 8 months will go by, and what do you have to show for it? I love consultants. I've hired them all. They can be very, very useful, but you need to provide them direction, not the other way around. Don't put MDM in a back seat. I used to see this all the time where MDM is being kind of coupled to ERP programs or to some larger program where MDM was just kind of in the wake, as it were. It was being pulled along by something else. It wasn't the goal. In a perfect world, MDM should be able to stand on its own. Build a business case for MDM where the value of MDM is independent of the value of your digital transformation or your ERP consolidation or your cloud migration or whatever those other things are that are all important, but your business case for MDM needs to stand on its own. Here's some more heresy. Data cleanups. This is going to sound totally and completely counterintuitive, but in an analytical style of MDM where you are solving for a 360 or a 280 of something, you don't need to clean up data. Yes, you heard that right. You don't need to clean up data. And arguably, if you embark on a data cleanup, you will not launch an MDM program in 90 days. I've tried. It doesn't end well because those data cleanups never end, right? And one human being working at a rather meteoric rate can maybe cleanse about 1,000 records in a month. And if you've got 40 or 50 or 60,000 customer records with an error rate of 5 to 10 or 15 or maybe even 20%, you do the math. You're talking probably about a small army of people to do a data cleanup where you don't even need it in this analytical style of MDM. And why do I say that? Because if you do that business case the right way, what you can do is price in the cost of bad data. Is 70 or 80% of an MDM solution better than 0% of an MDM solution? It absolutely is. Will you ever get to 100%? No, you will not. Is it desirable and admirable to try to get to 80 or 90%? Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. But if you tried to get to 80 or 90% in the next 90 days, you won't launch. And I would argue you can still deliver a ton of value by having 70% of that single view of something that you didn't have before. So just be very, very wary about data cleanups. They take a long time. They can be incredibly costly. And if you do this the right way, and if you build out that business case, you can still show the business that you can drive a lot of value without getting involved in a prolonged data cleanup. When you get to that operational style of MDM, where you create a single version of the truth, a gold master record of something, and you push it into another system, yes, you want it to be accurate, and you want to start looking at things like data cleanups when you get to that phase. But if you're talking about MDM in 90 days, data cleanups, not going to help. All right, that's it. So much to chew on. Are you ready? I didn't actually take that picture, but it's relatively close to my house. I'll leave this slide up while we're having other questions. I see one came in right at the end, maybe. Yes?
We have 2 questions to ask. One of them is 90-day MVP. Should technology really be part of the initial business case? It's continually first, and we often lack clear requirements.
Technology part of the business case, meaning vendor evaluation and selection. I think maybe that's what you're asking. Because generally for most MDM programs, like 70% of them, they're being spearheaded out of a technology organization. So I assume what you're talking about is the use of some sort of software solution within that 90 days. It's a good question. The hardest part about what you will be doing in this 90 days, arguably from a technology perspective, is something called entity resolution, meaning Acme, Acme Inc., Acme Co., Acme and Son. Is that one thing or is that 4 things? Right? And when you're talking about a lot of data and a lot of variability in the data, that can be very, very difficult. Now, there are tools out there that are freestanding of MDM solutions that can be used to support some use cases. A great example is third-party data, like data from a Dun & Bradstreet or other third-party data sources that you can use as reference sources, as a version of truth to help with some of that matching. Dun & Bradstreet is particularly good at this when it comes to company-related data. Can you do some of that matching using some rudimentary approaches, full text matching, looking across the first 3 letters of a text string to see if they're the same? Yes. Could you get to 50 or 60% of value? Yeah, you might be able to. So I think the answer to the question is, I hear the concern. If you're talking about vendor evaluation selection, chances are you're not going to be up and running, but most MDM vendors are running in the cloud and most of them are now running SaaS. So it's really all about your procurement process. If you can do that in 2 to 3 or 4 weeks, I think you could still probably do this even if you include the selection of an MDM software vendor into the mix. But it's not necessarily a hard requirement. And arguably, if you've got the time, maybe do some sort of POC without software first, right? To see what you can get to on your own using some fairly manual approaches to the things that I talked about. Arguably, that would be a great baseline to build an ROI, to build a business case, to go and buy that software. Because what you could do is get to 50 or 60% of a solution. And then what you'd be justifying is using software to get from 50 or 60 to 80 or 90. Is there one more question?
No, actually, there was just a comment.
Oh.
Most echoing what you just said. Which is
cool.
Really cool.
No, that's good.
I want to thank you, Malcolm. I hope you'll come back because there's so much more to cover in master data management, in data governance, et cetera. I am sorry we haven't been able to get to other questions. Please go to the LinkedIn page for Data Management U. Post your questions. I'm sure that Malcolm and other experts who are part of the Data Management U webpage on LinkedIn will be happy to answer them. If you are still here, that means you are probably eligible for the PDU. And next month, we hope to see a presentation from on proactive networking, especially for data management and IT people. Last Thursday in the month, 12 o'clock Central, 1 o'clock Eastern. I look forward to seeing all of you. Malcolm, I hope to see you again soon.
Me
Thank you
too.
again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here. I hope folks take a chance to connect with me on LinkedIn because I'm building out my network and I'm sharing a lot of information there. So
Yes,
it's been
you
my
are.
pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really look forward to doing this again.
Thank you. And I appreciate all the questions and comments. Please don't hesitate to post them on LinkedIn pages, and we'll see you again next month.
Bye all.
Bye.